know that smell? That particular smell of institutional bleach mixed with boiled vegetables and something else you could never quite name, but you recognize it the moment it hits you. I smelled it for the first time when I was 8 years old, walking through the door of a nursing home in Bessemer, Alabama, where they had taken my granddad. A man who had laid brick with his bare hands since he was 12 years old. A man who had survived things I won't even try to put words to this early in our time together. And there he was, sitting in a plastic chair by a window that faced a parking lot, staring at nothing. They had taken everything from him except his heartbeat. I'm 90 years old. I live alone in my own house. I cook my own food. I drive my own car. And I am going to tell you exactly how I got here and how I plan to stay here until God himself decides otherwise. My name is Cornelius James Beaumont. People who know me call me CJ. I was born in 1935 in Birmingham, Alabama, in a shotgun house on the south side where the steel mills ran day and night and the sky above our neighborhood was never fully dark and never fully clean. My father worked at Tennessee Coal and Iron. My mother took in laundry. I grew up understanding, before I had the vocabulary to say it, that in this country, a black man's body was considered a resource before it was considered a life. Something to be used and, when it was used up, set aside. I spent 31 years as a union electrician. I wired buildings from Atlanta to Detroit. I marched in 1963. I stood 3 rows behind a man whose voice could rearrange the interior of your chest. I buried a wife. I buried a son. I raised a daughter who is now a pediatric surgeon in Houston and who calls me every single morning at 7 a.m. without fail. I have lived what some people would call a hard life. I call it mine. Before I go any further, I want to stop and say something directly to this channel and to every person watching this right now. I want to thank this channel for listening to me and for reaching my voice to people I will never meet. If what I'm saying means something to you, you can subscribe to this channel, which is free. Like the video and share your thoughts in the comment section. I read every single one of them. And if you have your own story, your own hard-earned knowledge that deserves to be heard, there's a link in the description where you can share it. Don't let your wisdom die with you. That would be the real tragedy. Now, back to my life's lesson. It was 2012. I was 77 years old. My wife Dorothy had been gone for 4 years. My son Marcus had been gone for 11. He was 43 when a blood clot took him, just like that, on a Tuesday afternoon in his driveway in Memphis. You never recover from burying your child. You learn to carry it, but you never recover. And after Dorothy went, the house got very quiet in a way I had not anticipated. I had been a man of action my entire life. I was always moving, always fixing something, always needed somewhere. And then suddenly, I was just an old man in a house full of photographs. I stopped cooking real meals. I was eating crackers and canned soup and calling it dinner. I stopped going to my Tuesday card game with the men from my old union hall. I told myself I was tired. The truth is, I was disappearing, quietly, voluntarily. I would sit in my armchair after it got dark and I would not turn the lights on. I would just sit there in the dark. And I want to be honest with you because I think honesty is the only thing worth offering at my age. There were nights sitting in that dark where I thought about my grandfather in that plastic chair in Bessemer. And I thought, maybe this is just how it ends. Maybe you do your fighting and your living and your loving, And then the last chapter is just this, just waiting, just fading, just letting the current take you wherever it takes you. And then one morning I woke up and I could not button my own shirt. My fingers were too stiff. And something happened inside me that I can only describe as a kind of cold fury. Not grief, not fear, fury. Because I recognized what was happening. The body was starting to lock up because I had stopped asking it to move. The mind was going gray because I had stopped feeding it anything worth chewing on. I was not dying. I was allowing myself to be put away. And I decided, right there at my kitchen table with my unbuttoned shirt, that I was not going to do that. That I had not survived everything I had survived to hand myself over to a plastic chair by a parking lot window. What I built after that morning is not a wellness routine. I want to be clear about that. I am not a wellness man. What I built is a resistance strategy. 5 specific commitments that I have held to every single day for the last 13 years. And I believe they are the reason I'm sitting here talking to you instead of sitting somewhere else staring at nothing. The first commitment is this: keep a physical contract with the world every single day, no matter what. Here's what I mean. When I was working as an electrician, I had no choice but to use my body. I was climbing, pulling wire, carrying equipment. My body was in constant negotiation with the physical world. When I retired, I made the mistake that most people make. I thought rest was the reward. I thought stillness was what I had earned. And the body accepted that offer immediately and started making permanent adjustments. The truth about the human body, especially after 70, is brutal and simple. It does not maintain anything you do not use. It is not sentimental. It does not care that you used to be strong. It only responds to what you are asking of it right now, today. The body is like a tool left in a shed. Leave it there long enough, and it will rust into the shape of its own disuse. So my rule is not about exercise in the way most people think about exercise. My rule is about friction. Physical friction with the world. Every single day I do something that requires my body to negotiate with gravity and resistance. In summer, I tend my garden, and I mean real gardening, not standing with a hose. I am on my knees in the dirt. In winter, I have a set of resistance bands and a pull-up bar in my door frame that my grandson installed, and I use them. I walk 1 mile every morning before I eat breakfast, even in the rain, especially in the rain. People my age sometimes tell me they are too tired, and I understand that. But I want you to hear this carefully. There are 2 kinds of tired. There's the tired that comes from doing, which is honest and recoverable. And there's the tired that comes from not doing, which is a slow collapse disguised as rest. The second kind will put you in a facility. The first kind will keep you in your own house. Do not confuse them. The second commitment is this: every week, learn something that makes you feel slightly stupid. I grew up in a time when black children in Alabama were educated in underfunded schools with outdated textbooks and told implicitly and explicitly that the ceiling was low. The act of learning for me has always had political weight. It has always been an act of resistance. And I have carried that understanding with me. But there is something specific that I do now that I think is critical for anyone who wants to stay mentally independent into old age. I deliberately seek out things I do not understand, things that make me feel like a beginner, because the feeling of not knowing something, that uncomfortable friction of encountering a new idea, is what keeps the mind from calcifying. I am currently learning to read music at 90 years old. I have listened to jazz my entire life. I have loved it, but I never learned to read the notation. So now 3 times a week I sit at the upright piano that has been in my living room since 1989, and I work through an instruction book designed for children. I am terrible at it. That is the point. I also have an agreement with my daughter. Every Sunday when she calls, she tells me about one case she worked on that week. Not the personal details, but the medical thinking, the diagnostic reasoning. She talks, I ask questions, I write down words I don't know, and I look them up. My brain is being asked to stretch in a direction it has never gone before, and it responds. I can feel it respond. The mind, like the body, does not maintain what you do not use. But more than that, the mind actively deteriorates when it is only given familiar things. Comfort is the enemy of cognition. If everything in your daily life is already known and already understood, your brain has no reason to build new architecture. And an aging brain without new architecture is a brain that is quietly preparing for its own shutdown. Find the thing that makes you feel like a beginner. Stay there. Stay uncomfortable. That discomfort is not a sign that you are too old. It is a sign that you are still alive. The third commitment is this: never let a day pass without saying something true to another human being. After Dorothy died, I understood, in a way I had not before, how isolation works. It does not announce itself. It does not feel like loneliness at first. It feels like preference. You tell yourself you're an introvert. You tell yourself you like the quiet. You tell yourself you have earned the right to be left alone. And all of that may be true. But there is a particular kind of silence that is not peace. It is a slow filling up with your own unspoken thoughts. And those thoughts, without the friction of another human perspective, begin to lose their connection to reality. I have watched bitterness take men I loved. I watched it take my friend Roosevelt, who I worked alongside for 20 years. After his wife died, after his kids moved away, after he retired, he just hardened. He stopped being able to hear anything that challenged what he already believed. The world became, in his telling, entirely made up of people who had done him wrong or who didn't understand him. He died at 79 in an assisted living facility, furious at everyone, including me. I made a rule after watching Roosevelt. Every single day I must say something true and something personal to another human being. Not pleasantries, not weather, something real. This is non-negotiable. Some days it is a long phone conversation with my daughter. Some days it is sitting on my porch and talking to my neighbor Gerald, who is 63 and thinks he knows everything. And I tell him when I think he's wrong. Some days it is a letter. I still write letters by hand. I write to 3 people who are still living, who were part of my life decades ago. I tell them true things, things I remember, things I am grateful for, things I regret. The reason this matters practically, not just emotionally, is this. When you stop being accountable to other people, you stop being accountable to reality. Your sense of yourself becomes untethered, and an untethered sense of self is very difficult to distinguish from the outside, from cognitive decline. I believe some of what gets diagnosed as decline in old people is actually just profound isolation. The mind was not broken. It was just talking to no one but itself for too long. The fourth commitment is the one nobody wants to hear, but I will not soften it because softening it would be a betrayal of everything I've just told you. You must actively prepare for your own diminishment, not in a morbid way, in a practical, clear-eyed, dignified way. I have a document in my desk drawer. I wrote it myself. It is 12 pages long. It describes in specific terms what I want and do not want if my health declines. It describes my financial situation, the location of every important document, my wishes for my house, my furniture, my tools, my piano. It describes the 3 conditions under which I would be willing to accept help moving into a different living situation, and the 3 conditions under which I would not. It describes what a good death looks like to me. My daughter has a copy, my attorney has a copy, my neighbor Gerald, God help him, has a copy. I wrote that document not because I am morbid. I wrote it because the alternative is to leave all of those decisions to other people at the moment when you are least equipped to fight for yourself. I have watched what happens when there is no document. I watched it happen to my grandfather. I watched it happen to men and women at my church who spent decades being capable, dignified, self-determining human beings, and then spent their final years having their most fundamental decisions made by whoever was standing in the room. The people who end up in facilities against their wishes are almost always the people who never did the hard paperwork, who never had the uncomfortable conversations, who believed that planning for the worst was giving in to the worst. It is not. It is the exact opposite. Planning for the worst is the only way to give yourself a fighting chance of avoiding it. Do the paperwork. Have the conversations. Write it all down while your handwriting is still your own. And now the 5th commitment. This one will surprise you. I only learned about it the way I learned about most useful things in my life, which is by ignoring the advice for years and then discovering through painful experience that the advice was right. Oral health is one of the most powerful predictors of how long you will live independently, and almost nobody talks about it in the context of aging. I know. You are expecting something poetic. Bear with me because the science here is not small. I learned that the bacteria that live in an unhealthy mouth do not stay in the mouth. The same bacterial inflammation that causes gum disease travels through the bloodstream and directly impacts the heart, the brain, and the joints. There are now decades of research linking periodontal disease to heart disease, to stroke, to the kind of systemic inflammation that accelerates cognitive decline. I brush my teeth twice a day for a full 2 minutes each time. I floss every night, not quickly, properly. I see my dentist every 4 months, not 6. I have worked to address and maintain every dental issue I have. This is not vanity. This is a direct line of defense against the exact conditions that most commonly put elderly people in care facilities. Heart events, strokes, cognitive decline. The mouth is the entry point for all of that, and it is one of the most controllable, least expensive interventions available to anyone at any age. If you are young and listening to this, start now. If you are old and listening to this, start today. The research will shock you if you look it up. I genuinely believe that fixing my dental health in my 50s added years to my independent life. Now, let me bring this home. I am 90 years old. This morning I made myself a real breakfast. Eggs, greens, a piece of whole wheat toast. I ate it at my kitchen table, which has been my kitchen table for 43 years. I looked out my window at a yard I planted with my own hands. I have a piano I'm learning to play badly and beautifully. I have a garden, a card game on Tuesday, and a phone call from my daughter at 7 tomorrow morning. Nobody put me here. I built this, deliberately, over decades. And here's what I need you to understand. The nursing home does not begin when you are old. It begins 30 years earlier in the small daily surrenders that nobody warned you about. It begins the morning you decide the walk is not worth it. It begins the year you stop learning anything new because you tell yourself you are too busy. It begins the decade you let your friendships thin out because maintenance feels like effort. It begins the afternoon you put off the paperwork because thinking about decline feels like inviting it. By the time most people realize they are drifting toward dependency, the current is already very strong. My grandfather was a great man. He laid brick for 60 years. He survived things that should have broken him 10 times over. And in the end, he sat in a plastic chair by a parking lot window because nobody, including himself, had understood that the last chapter requires the same fight as every chapter before it. He thought endurance was enough. Endurance is not enough. You have to build, actively and deliberately, the conditions that make independence possible. And you have to start building them long before you need them. The 5 things I told you today are not old people things. They are life architecture. The physical activity, the continuous learning, the daily honesty with other human beings, the hard paperwork, and yes, the dental floss. These are the building blocks. And the time to lay the foundation is not when the walls are already cracking. I am fighting for my final chapter every single morning. But the reason I'm able to fight is because I spent decades building something worth defending. You are building right now, whether you know it or not. The question is whether you are building something that will hold. Start today. Your 90-year-old self is depending on you.